Not at all did I ever have a goal. I could have never imagined that I would be so fortunate to end up doing what I actually do. When I was a kid, I think my goal was probably to be an actor. But by the time I got to university, I was really focused on other things: politics, advocacy, human rights, all the good uni things. It wasn't really until I moved to New York in my early 30s that I saw working in theatre really as an option, especially as something other than an actor, which is good because I was a terrible actor. And I think for me, it was realising that the theatre and the arts in general and television and film and radio required large teams of people, not all of whom were front and centre and on stage. So my goals changed, and where I started with that journey was probably in high school. Like many people who go into theatre, I started at high school and then got sidetracked for a decade or so. I did all sorts of things that were unrelated to theatre, and I was very fortunate by the time that I was reconsidering my career path, which was after completing an MBA, working for an internet startup, and then for a CEO of a major hedge fund. I was really mentored by some extraordinary women who allowed me to dip my toes in various parts of the business that I don't think I would have been able to do at any other time. I jumped into the arts straight after September 11th, 2001, and the entire industry was evolving from a catastrophic change and a catastrophic strike, literally, on New York. And in many ways, the skill set that I brought to the industry was the right skill set for that particular moment. It was the first time that we were looking at things like dynamic pricing, and the internet had just become part of the world of theatre and ticket purchasing and travel and tourism in a way that it just hadn't existed before. So in many ways, I was kind of in the right place at the right time. And I think if it had been somewhat different and I had been coming in maybe 10 years later or 10 years earlier, I would have had a very, very different world that I would have entered, and my skill set might not have been seen as attractive as it was, given the fact that I wasn't trained as an actor or as a musician and hadn't worked in theatre for the 30 years prior to sort of jumping in. I was living in San Francisco at the time of September 11th, 2001, and I was due to fly out on September 12th, 2001 for a business trip to New York. And that business trip obviously got cancelled, but just got pushed later and later and later. By the time I moved to New York, it was, I was here for work in December and January 2002. And again, I was in the fortunate position that I keep making it sound like I just land in the right place at the right time with my feet down. And it's probably more complicated than that. But in some ways, the lower rents that happened as a result of September 11th, the fact that I was pretty free from any particular location. I think the fact that the .com I was working for was evolving and I was less and less interested in doing that. I got headhunted for a hedge fund, which I worked at briefly, but really, you know, within a couple of years of September 11th, I was asking myself the same questions that I'd been asking for a couple of years by then, which is, well, what do I really want to do? And what is it going to be that makes me happy? And eventually somebody asked me the really obvious question at the time, which was, you love theatre, why don't you do theatre? And I sort of poo-pooed it away and dismissed it. And I said, well, theatre, I mean, first, you don't make any money, and I'm living in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And second, who would hire me? I've got an MBA, I haven't done theatre, I was a crap actor, I wasn't a very good director. But it sat with me for a little while, and because there was this great evolution in New York, and there were these assumptions about New York changing forever and never returning to a pre-9/11 world. And in fact, that discussion, I think, happened all around the world. I think it happened in Australia as well as in the United States, that nothing will ever be the same. I thought, oh, well, that sort of works perfectly, because if nothing will ever be the same, then maybe I can wrangle my way into the theatre business. And I was in the fortunate position that I, again, sort of right time, right place, and worked for an amazing woman who had been theatre producing for a few years before that, but was also young. People who were seeking non-traditional skills, people who were seeking candidates for the industry that had done completely different things and had never worked in theatre before and might have been able to bring a new perspective. And with my internet experience, with my MBA, I think people, instead of saying, sorry, you're not a theatre person, were like, you know a little bit about the internet. We know nothing about the internet. You know a little bit about dynamic pricing. We don't know anything about dynamic pricing. You know a little bit about inventory management. Come along. Well, I had undertaken my graduate degree in Australia. I had spent a couple of years early in my undergraduate career at UCLA and had very much enjoyed the experience of that, although I've got to say, it was in the early 1990s, and so I got a part-time job working at Qantas, working at the airport at LAX, and that was my communication with Australia at the time. Phone calls were $6 a minute. There was no internet. People didn't just jump on planes for 2-week holidays, even, that recently. So I was in the fortunate position that while I was working at Qantas at LAX, as well as studying, I was able to sort of grab the Sydney Morning Herald as it would come off used and slightly wilted off the airplane. And that was my entire connection to Australia. I again, phone calls were $4, $5, $6 a minute. I didn't have the money to do that as a student. So in some ways, again, I was very fortunate that being in that job allowed me to maintain a connection with Australia in a way that I think if I hadn't had that job, I might have felt much more distant. And that could have gone either way. It could have been a desperate yearning to get back to Australia and to be with my family and friends, or it could have been one of several of my friends and colleagues who were doing the same thing at the same time, who completely disconnected with them. I moved back to Australia after the LA earthquake, the Northridge earthquake in 1994, and worked for the New South Wales government for a little while, then went to go do my Masters of Business Administration. And at the end of that, I was really interested in just sort of getting out of town for a little while. So I moved to San Francisco to spend sort of 6 months there, and was just very lucky that with the Internet 1.0 starting up and the dot-com boom of the late 1990s and early 2000s, that there was a labour shortage and people were looking for people to work in all sorts of things that I might not have otherwise been considered for. Fortunately, having an MBA, again, those were the sorts of skills that were being sought at the end of the 1990s. And I worked for a startup internet company that eventually brought me to New York and allowed me to change careers. I absolutely love working in the arts, and I absolutely love artists. I've always and had always been a huge consumer of the arts. So the ability to work with people who create the art is just astounding to me. I pinch myself constantly. My real motivation of the art is the art and the artists. I'm working with incredibly talented people every day of the year to create art and tell stories and to share them with thousands of other people. Again, I smile even talking about it because it's just that thing that blows me away. Being willing to help other people get into the business. So many people have been so good to me over the years and have given me that 5 minutes and have told me stories or have told me tales of their own careers that have really, really affected the way that I think and the way that I work and the way that I want to be. So I find helping other people to do the same is easy. That is one of the things that I never have to think twice about. I have always felt that anyone who ever reaches out and wants to talk about the business, wants to talk about potential career paths, I may not always be able to come up with good advice, although I have usually some advice. But really, it's the thing, we're an ecosystem, and we're a very, very high-risk industry, and we face constant challenges, and you can't really talk about current challenges in live entertainment without talking about COVID. Just as an aside, you know, COVID is the single biggest threat probably to our industry. And I throw live entertainment, but the arts generally, since the last pandemic in the early 1900s. And, you know, even then the theatres didn't shut down in New York as long as this one. I think it's a global threat, and I think that it's something that's going to scare a lot of people away from this business. But we're an ecosystem. You can't have YouTube without writers and actors, and you can't have television without music makers and filmmakers, and you can't have people working in these, you know, the same people who are making a TikTok videos are ones who are working in their high school arts programs, either behind the stage or on stage. That ecosystem is so fragile and it's so large and it affects so much. While governments, I think, often identify the industry's importance, they've been much, much slower in many ways to provide assistance to the industry with appropriate aid, and that's not peculiar to Australia. But ultimately, cities require the arts, and the arts require an ecosystem. And all of that is to say, the more the merrier. If I hadn't been told by the people who have mentored me and have shepherded me through this business, if I hadn't been told that I should just do it, I would have never done it. So when people ask me what's my advice to young people who are trying to get into the business, don't let the gatekeepers tell you why you can't do it. People get paid in this industry to tell you no. In show business across the board, there is always someone who is paid, whose primary job is to say no. And my advice is don't listen to them, be persistent, remain humble throughout, but just keep at it until you get a yes. Goodness. Well, thank you. I'm now going to faint or something. Wow, thank you so much. I can't believe that. That's amazing. I'm speechless, and that's a rare thing that you've actually rendered me speechless. Wow. Cool. Thank you. I'm honestly completely and utterly touched. So now I'm going to freestyle. When I moved to New York after a few years on the West Coast, this organisation, Advance, had just emerged. I think at the time it was called, it was YAPA, Young Australians Professionals Abroad. And I think we were basically a listserv made up of primarily finance professionals or corporate players or management consultants who had been here for a few years and then would take off either back to Australia or firmly entrench themselves. To be included, with such an amazing group of finalists from across the arts and commercial creatives and the amazing talent and science and finance. I mean, I'm genuinely shocked and touched and delighted just to be in that company and to be in the company of 10 years of people who've been finalists for these awards is just, it's amazing. And I'm always blown away. I read the Born Global newsletters from Advance, and I get to read the little postcards from other places around the world, and I'm always amazed at what people can do. And not just because they're doing it overseas. I think, there's always that cultural cringe thing where, if it happens overseas, it must be better. I've never thought that at all. It's just amazing how we've spread out and how much people can do all over the world, in Australia and beyond. So I'm blathering, but honestly quite touched and humbled.